Hearing none, by consensus then, we will approve the agenda. Moving right along, item number 3, review of funding, both the federal and state funds. And we'll, at this point, we will call on Mr. Reed to talk about that.
Okay. As you recall, the group asked, mostly came from Brian, to check into federal funds. Perkins was the monies that he was interested in, so I took all of them. I didn't give a handout to anyone except at the table. Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there are copies available if anyone wants it. But I compared titles 1, 2A, 6B, and then the CTE revenue. That's the 27% offset that a number of teachers at Dickinson High School receive from career and technical education in terms of revenue. And you can see the revenues and expenditures for all three years. The 12-13, 13-14, and then this current year with what we're budgeting and projecting to expend. On page 2 at the bottom, it shows the change from previous. If you take all of the revenues in those programs, and you can line them up individually if you want, but I combine them and then show the difference from 12-13, 13-14, the district from the general fund subsidized those programs by $859,660 more than the previous year. And in that particular year, federal funding compared between the two went down about $200,000. That's why there's quite a jump there. But since we're talking about 14-15, that's probably the most important one. The increase was less, but it's still, if you take CTE, all of the title programs, because we have look-alike programs, LLI, other vocational programs, you put all of those in there, and the district share for this year is $583,563 more than it was compared to last year. And so on page 3 I mapped out all of the revenues, how much federal funds we received, and I think I said this last Wednesday, it's about, well, it is 26%. I think I said 27 that night. For federal programs, the subsidy from the federal state flow through is 26%. And so there's the data on that. I did print out, Brian, and I emailed Mr. Doctor, since he's the vocational director, printed out all of the Perkins accounts. And we used all of those for equipment and travel last year. And then he sent me a list of all of the individuals that received that 27% reimbursement. The only funds I took out of here in terms of vocational education was the RECTC funds. We get some offset for that, but I didn't do any of that. So if you have further questions about that, shoot me an email or let me know. So with that, if it's okay, I'll head right into state funding.
Yep, go ahead.
This, I think there are copies for everybody back there too. The number for state and local aid that I have is still at $3,532,244. That's the same number that I emailed to Brian last week, and so I went back to check and double check, and that's still accurate. I did go to the DPI website, to see, since Mr. Fay had asked Jerry Coleman to give some numbers, and you have on pages 2 and 3 copies of the DPI website, and I'll just explain real briefly what those numbers mean. You see that for state and local funding this year, the number DPI is using is $32,022,000, and last year was $28,037, and so the difference there is 3.984, $3,984,000. those monies that he has on that spreadsheet are numbers that are used to check adequacy. They have the in lieu of property taxes offset in that one column. And they also have the contribution in lieu of monies in there. So it does include some gross production tax money. And so at the bottom of that spreadsheet, I made some notes on that. And then we have local adjustments. I mentioned them last Wednesday. I have to subtract out the $87,000 that they take off our foundation aid for Power School, data collection they call it. I have to also take out the match for Medicaid, which was $37,004 last year. And so I was trying to think where $4.3 million could have come from Mr. Coleman. I could probably guess that he added transportation fees. We're budgeting $227,000 in state fees. That's probably in there. 21st Century Learning Grant, our RAS program, that grant is probably in there. And so if you add $400,000 to it, that's probably where we got that number. So.
And I would agree that, you know, your 3.5 that you said last time in this here, you know, didn't doubt you at all, because
right.
You know the local numbers, you know how that goes, and I had no doubt that you were accurate there, and I did write that number down, and I did.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I'm glad that that we had a pretty good match on that, Jim. And you can see in Mr. Coleman's spreadsheet, he's actually got foundation aid for us this year at $25,153,382. The number that I have in the budget that you see on the front page is $25,323,000. That's what we've budgeted. He doesn't know how many kids. He estimated our ADM. I have actual numbers in there. So the 3.5 million and 3.9 if you throw GPT funding in there. Just please know that with gross production tax money that we receive from the state, that is imputed at 75%. So if we get $1 million, they taketh away $750,000, and we keep the $250,000. So I think we're pretty good on where the state funding is. So that's data that the team requested.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Any questions for Mr. Reed? So we're in agreement that this is the money we have. Do I hear any consensus there?
Well, Mr. Fay did agree that we have the 3.5, so.
So we're saying yes. Okay.
I would agree with that Mr. Reed was accurate with 3.5 million extra above and beyond last year's.
Okay. Moving along, let's talk a little bit about the proposal. And help me out here. I'm trying to understand your position on the proposal. But one thing what concerns me, why did you think it was presumptuous of the board to assume a number that was already given to us as a salary? I don't understand that. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Okay, well, first, I guess, you know, one of the things you asked last time, what changed, and I guess where I want to go with that is when we were bargaining before we went to impasse, we came back with a compromise of taking the 2 days off, and we would try and sell that $1,500 raise the second year, and the board rejected it at that point. So when we went through the impasse proceedings and the whole court and the court deemed that a 2-year contract couldn't be issued, that pretty much says that bargain is done. This is a new bargain. The other thing that makes it pretty presumptuous is, especially when we're still bargaining and we need to know where we're going to be at. I understand that you have to put a dollar amount in there, but the other thing is a budget is a guideline. It's not set in stone. And so, yeah, you need a dollar amount to budget with, but you also report to DPI that 55% of your new monies goes to teacher salary, but that's only 18%. And we saw that report from DPI.
Well, using Mr. Reep's number, it is 23.
Okay, so 23. And then when we sat down and looked at a $1,500 raise and looked at pay stubs, and employees' pay went down on an average of $180 a month on a 12-month pay schedule because of health insurance and TFFR, and you multiply that by 12, that's $2,160 a year. A $1,500 raise doesn't even come close to covering that. So our employees are supposed to go backwards in take-home pay, yet we have extra students, we have extra duties, you know, we donate extra time to the district. So, you know, assuming that 1,500 is fine, I understand the budgeting point, you need something to budget with, but budgets can be changed.
Just a clarification on that, Brian. Was that less on the take-home with what they're currently getting?
Yes.
Based on 13, 14?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if you add the 1,500, you know, depending on where they're at on the salary schedule, and, you know, that was an average because the TFFR changes with where they are on the salary schedule, and taxes change, everything changes. So, you know, we just took a sampling of where they were, and 180 was an average, and
Yeah, for getting paid on last year.
Yep.
And we knew that would happen if
Yep.
we didn't finish. Because TFFR did go up that 2%, and the health premium went up, and that was that started right away in September. So.
And TFFR went up for both sides, and we understand that.
Yeah.
They went up 2%, and that was mandated by the legislature. There's nothing anybody this group can do to control that.
Yeah.
And to follow up with Mr. Wool there, you know, we did come back with that counteroffer of a second year and agreed to, you know, try to compromise to avoid what happened, you know. And what we were asking for was quality professional development. And, you know, Ms. Fair asked, you know, what is it going to take? And we said, we want to be wild, we want quality. And we didn't see the value of that because many of it was not very quality. And trying to compromise to avoid that inevitable that happened was our attempt to negotiate, to offer, we'll do this if you do that. And you respectfully declined, unfortunately, and then we ended up where we were at.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. Is you stated at the last meeting about the cost of living and rents, and what evidence do you have to support that assertion?
Well, the next morning in the paper, right below the picture in the article of our bargain was HUD housing voucher increases from the governor in Southwest North Dakota because of the increase in the cost of housing. And we've got local businesses around the community, such as Mid-Continent, that's giving a $7,000 housing increase. Baker Boy gave $3 straight across the board to help their employees with cost of living, which is over $6,000 a year. We've got companies like One Oak gave 4% increase to their employees to help. So it's not just us that's fighting that. We went on, and I can provide them handouts at the next meeting if you'd like, but went to cost of living increase and checked there, and
Where
on the internet.
For
there's
cities
no
in North Dakota?
Cities in North Dakota,
CPI
and
index.
Dickinson is number 2 in North Dakota. Williston is
rent,
number 1
or-
for cost of living.
That'd
And they say the average
be helpful to see that.
the average cost of living in Dickinson is approximately $13,000 higher than communities like Fargo and Bismarck.
Could you share that data?
What's
At
the,
the next meeting, yes, I don't have it with me, so.
Thank you, Brian. You also had made a statement that you didn't know the reason that you didn't know how much dollars would be added in the next year of a 2-year contract. But if we go back to what Mr. Fay just said too, is that, you know, the offer was $40,200 in the second year, and with no PD days. So that you didn't know then either, so I wonder why that is important at this point.
It wasn't me that didn't know, it was Mr. Reap when we were talking dollar amounts that said we know the first year what we're gonna get. The second year was unsure, and so we were gonna be cautious about that. And that was words that were used from our resource person, that he was unsure on what the funding was gonna be the second year. That was where that comment had came from and that information.
And that's probably true. You know, I went back through the minutes to look to see if we talked about year 2 funding in our May meetings, the 17th, the 20, and I could find no reference to how much money. And the unpredictability of that is, if we knew what foundation aid payments were going to go from $8,810 to $92, but you don't know how many students, and you don't know what the offset for property valuation is going to be, and so on. So,
But now we do know. I mean, we have a lot better idea.
The next question I have is, what is the percentage increase of your proposal for the 2014-15 school year?
I can figure that.
Me either, because we said we were gonna talk dollars and we agreed to that at the table on the first meeting.
Then what is the dollar amount?
It takes,
Our proposal was $36,250.
Yes.
Which is $4,250 on base.
Yep.
On the calculating base.
So what's the total increase then of what you were asking?
2.295 million, which was 53.37% of the new local money, but that was looking at the 4.3. So a little over 55%.
Those are not necessarily the numbers that I have. So, let's see here.
So if, I think that when we calculated just the increase in salaries, we came up with 2,765,796 would be the increase that you were requesting. If you add benefits into that, it goes to 3,335,965, and then if you add in the increase in health, of which is 250,000.
What I used was Mr. Reap's number of every $100 added to the base was $54,000 added to the budget. And I took the 42.5 times 54,000 is what I ended up getting, that 2.295 million. I assumed, and maybe that was bad of me to assume, that when you said $100 in the base, 54,000 included the health insurance and the benefits and everything else that was associated with that cost.
It's pretty close. The actual number, I think, when I went back and did it, because I used that as a benchmark, was 54,244. But even if you use 54, because I ran it both ways, I did the actual and then that number, because that's what I shared with Mr. Wool and Mr. Fay. The number that I came up with from what the actual money that was paid on teacher salaries last year for what I call object code 110 and 111, that's certified contracts, and 111 is coaching and advisor.
Yep.
I didn't count stipends and I didn't count substitutes or temporary certified, but the actual number when you pour that into the spreadsheet is 2,765,796, and then when you add the benefits, the number I have is 3,585,965.
And I'd just like to point out that with your proposal, that's 102% of the available funding.
I'd like to point out that when we ask for a dollar amount that's accurate on the base and then it changes when we come to the table, it's hard to figure a proposal too, though. you know, when we ask and we use a
Mr.
number
Wall,
that came from
you
Mr.
can
Reed.
go out to the website and look at the entire budget and plug those
That-
numbers in and come up with the exact amount.
We have agreed on a resource person, and when we
Did
asked the
you-
resource
did you-
person,
did you
can I
come
finish,
to-
please?
Did you come to Mr. Reap and ask him?
I
that?
asked Mr. Reap and he emailed it to me. I said, what does $100 cost exactly on the base? And it was $54,000 is what, he had one number without benefits and a number with. And so that's the number we used.
Mr. Reap, you want to just address the discrepancy in those numbers?
Well, you know, I'd have to see Jim's calculations, but I think we're pretty close on that. I mean, I don't, what did you say? You had 2.29 million? And my number is 2.7? I'd have to see how he calculated that, but I did it both ways, and then I actually took the DEA's proposal and put it into the index and let it run. And you guys have that spreadsheet, I'm sure, and did the same.
Well, that's,
And then I put career increments. There's still a little bit of continuance pay that some teachers still get, and with coaching and extra days and all of that. And so I actually ran it. I thought it was pretty close to that 54, but I haven't seen how you got to 2.29. But perhaps that's something that, if you want, you and I can sit down and flesh that out so that we are on the same page. I mean, I have no problem with that.
Madam Chair. Is it simply explained by the fact, Mr. Reap, that you compared the number to last year's expenditures when you ran it through the spreadsheet, and maybe Mr. Fay didn't have last year's expenditures?
It could be. And yeah, that's a good point, Dr. Sullivan. Maybe you're taking out the additional.
I can explain how I, you know.
The
'cause
additional staff probably is not in your calculation.
in career increments, we don't have access to who and how much career increments are. But, you know, and I'll just tell you how I came up with it was utilizing that $54,000 number.
Right.
You know, added to the budget as with 42.5. That's how I came up with that 2
Yeah.
point, you know, just I said, you know, assuming with what I had to work with.
Yeah, I think Dr. Sullivan's hit it right on the head, because within teacher increases, I took what we spent last year and what we have budgeted this year, and that's where that 2.7 million comes in. Not all of that is for teacher raises, if you want to call it that, because we added new staff.
right,
And
because we're up to 262
and I
FTEs, right?
calculated, it's $589,356 the board put into new positions that went through the budget committee, and it was at all levels, and so that's probably the difference.
Probably the difference right
I mean,
there.
if you go from 2.3 to 2.7, it's going to be pretty close. That 54,000, I mean, I still stand by that. The exact was 254, 244.
Okay.
So, but for rounding purposes, use 54. It's pretty close. But you're right, Dr. Sullivan. That's the difference in what we're talking about. But in terms of a budget, I have to compare from what we spent last year to what we're spending this year.
And I think every time we talk about numbers and percentages and dollars, we always seem to come back to, we're all sometimes using different ways to get to the number. And that's concerning to me, because not only is it hard for a budgetary standpoint from my perspective, but also when we come to this table and we have different numbers and we tell each other different things. So we need to we need to come to consensus on what is the real numbers here, because for us to continue to argue and go back and forth on numbers is counterproductive. Would you agree? Yes?
Yeah.
So we need to shore that up, because otherwise we're trying to budget or negotiate numbers that may or may not be absolutely correct. So I would encourage us to go back on that particular point, flush that out like Mr. Fay and Mr. Reap had said, to make sure when we come here we have the exact figures to bargain with.
And might I suggest that maybe, so that we can get to that point, we ought to compare the increase between what the board has proposed and, and that takes new teachers and some of that out of that. That increase between the two is $1,275,186 in just salaries. And that should include career increments and all of that. Just so that you have it, Jim, this year with what the board has proposed, career increments are $370,195.
Can you give me that other number again?
370,000.
Yeah.
1,275,186. When I put the DEA proposal in the spreadsheet and ran career increments and all of that. So that's the new money that, in addition to what the board offered, and in addition to budgeting for those 18.42 FTEs that the district
Those are the new
had.
ones.
And that 1.275 is including the career increments?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's everything that I mean, from what I could calculate.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
So my question would be then, if we're here to negotiate and see some proposals back and forth and work on things, does the board have a counter proposal that we'd like to discuss?
Not at this time. We're still trying to
With-
figure out what you're basing your proposal on. So with that, I'll turn over and say, you emphatically said that Fargo was number 1 in
Pay.
pay, and Dickinson was number 10. Is that correct?
Yep, right here are the numbers. Let's see, a Fargo teacher, which ranks 1 of 14, their average salary is $55,775. And Dickinson, who is 10 of 14, our average salary is $49,813. Okay?
You're using, those are averages.
Yes,
That's the
and
average,
that's
okay.
supplied by,
What's the beginning teacher make?
I don't have that with me.
Okay.
But here's the thing, are we only concerned about beginning teachers, or are we concerned about the whole staff?
Well, we're
Because-
concerned about the whole staff.
We're concerned-
Because we've worked hard at this group to compress our beginning salary schedule numbers, to increase
Absolutely.
beginning teachers, and, we've taken pay freezes to help them beginning teachers, and so, we've always tried to get them beginning teachers up, but we also need to keep our veteran staff.
Well, we would
You
agree
know,
with
so-
that 100%.
Right.
However, we want to make sure we compare apples to apples. And your previous comments were that we really have to worry about what we pay for a beginning teacher and bringing in, and recruiting and retaining,
both.
the teachers that we have, so.
But if you raise all salaries, that's gonna raise beginning teachers also,
Let me
you know,
pose the
so.
question then. If the school board offers a salary schedule that pays equal to or greater than Fargo, will it settle negotiations?
I'm sure it'll help. I mean, I can't say yes for sure because I don't know what them numbers are. I'd like to see a schedule, an offer.
Well, let's
Maybe we can compare those schools
take a look at those.
Want me to hand some of this out?
Yep.
Yep, please go ahead and hand those out.
Dr. Sullivan asked me to do some of those comparisons. And I agree with Brian, you can't just use the beginning cell.
After the last meeting, just so the team understands, because of the comparison to Fargo, I asked for the Assistant Superintendent to do some research on the assertion that we pay less than Fargo, and also make some comparisons to other school districts.
Can we
And
make
this
it
was
bigger?
the information that we gathered on some comparable school districts.
Nope.
It'll come back on. It'll adjust itself.
And it does?
I learned that when I was
It's
trained
magic.
on the-
Oh, look at that. Okay.
Technology.
So if everybody's got a copy of that, I just want to point out, if you take a look at the beginning teacher salaries, if you look at Fargo's, and we just compared Fargo, and then the other schools that we normally compare ourselves to being West Fargo, Mandan, and Jamestown, and then we threw Minot in there because sometimes we compare ourselves to Minot. If you take a look at the beginning teacher salaries, you know, we're above Fargo and West Fargo. If you just go down and take a look at the different cells on there, Dickinson still remains a BS plus 32 is still higher than everyone but Jamestown. And then if you go over to the MS plus 16, Dickinson is down at number 3 in comparison to the other ones. Now keep in mind that some of these salary schedules are different, so we were comparing as close as we can apples to apples, but that the beginning teacher salary, as we take a look at that, we're $188 less than Minot, which is number 1 on the scale. We're number 2. Fargo and West Fargo take 4 and 5 for beginning teacher salaries. And Fargo and West Fargo stay at 4 and 5 through the whole index. So it was surprising to me to see that, but I also wanted to know, you know, how can we be number 10? Or how can Fargo be number 1 when these are real numbers that those teachers in those school districts are being paid right now? And you notice also that they didn't add in some of these don't have their career increments and continuance pay. But I also want to point out that Fargo has a 190-day contract and they're paid less than the Dickinson teachers at 185 days, according to our research and what we received back from the school in Fargo.
Yes, Fran.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for a point of clarification, the rankings that we got were from DPI, and these are average reported salaries to DPI by districts.
Those would be last year's.
For
They're
this,
last year?
for
Those
this-
were last year's,
for
because
last year.
we wanted to use last year because we're on a 13-14 contract with continuing contract, and they've rolled ahead, we haven't. You know, so there's raises there that are applied and our district hasn't, so that's why we wanted to use as close apples to apples from DPI that, and so that's the DPI rankings is what we had.
Dr. Sullivan?
And I'm not a mathematician, and there's probably one in the room, but when we start talking about averages, there's more to taking a look at an average than just a raw salary number. I mean, it's important to remember that in the last 2 hiring seasons, how many new teachers have we added?
94.
94. Roughly 1/3 of our staff in 2 years. And I see Mr. Haynes sitting here, and many of them are at his age. And so that's logically going to impact that average. But when we take a look at the salary schedule, this is the information that is actually factual about where the Dickinson Public Schools ranks in comparison to Fargo and West Fargo.
Madam Chair, one of the reasons I chose BS 32 and 15 when Dr. Sullivan asked me to gather this data, and MS 16 and 15, we have a majority of our teachers at the 32 and 15 cell. I mean, most people are there. And I added them up. We have 15 beginning teachers that are at that cell. And I think there's 59 at the BS 32 and 30 at the MS 16. So it's about half of them. And the rest are sprinkled around the schedule. So it's a pretty good representation. It's not everything, but I suppose if we did a career earnings calculation for those districts, that would be some other information to see, but I would guess that, I mean, some of those schedules that you have, I mean, go to 30 years. Ours gets to 15 and then career increments kick in. I couldn't find, I don't believe there's another Class A district that has career increments. And I know nobody has continuance pay, and there's only a few that still get that continuance pay, because TFFR had an issue with that. So.
I think this is a better representation of all the cells, and like you mentioned, Mr. Wall, it's not just beginning teachers, it's all teachers throughout the salary schedule. And this is actual numbers from the salary schedules of each of these schools. So I would say that this is a better number, of course, what Dr. Sullivan said, than an average, because an average doesn't take into consideration the limiting factors. So these are better numbers in which to look at and to compare ourselves with than an average number, which is inherently, averages are incorrect. So I would encourage you to take this back, and I would encourage you to look this over and make some other determinations. Does anybody else have anything else they would like to discuss?
Just one more clarification on the West Fargo. West Fargo does contribute to the teacher side of TFFR, but I use the schedule that puts that calculation within that. The other districts do not. I was unsure about Mandan, and I emailed their business manager, and the teachers pay their full 11.75. So if you go to websites and look, make sure you get the TFFR one from,
because there's different models.
because you have to add that.
Yeah, and I think there's only 2 or 3 districts in the state that pay 100% of TFFR.
No, maybe
There's
in the
more.
Class A. There's
Right, yeah, in the Class A's.
40% pay.
Right, but
close.
Class A's, I mean.
Yeah. Devil's Lake, I think is one.
Well, if you just take a look at this, you can see the differences higher. It's outlined in yellow because that is a board proposal that's not been adopted yet, of course. But the other ones are settled real numbers. Coaching, of course, isn't included in the salary schedule, or advising isn't included either, so you would need to make that additional calculation. But the salary schedules are provided for you behind that, so everyone can sit and figure out where they would be if they were in that district, as an example.
Sure. Just one other clarification, mostly from Mr. Fay, I guess. That the number that I gave, that 1,200,000, that includes the second. I had to do a cost analysis of the second proposal that the DEA has on the table with the index and the frozen vertical. I went back and had to find how many that would affect and put that number in there. So that's in there also.
Okay.
But I can share that with you if you want. It wasn't a huge number.
So, Mr. Wall, you had said last meeting that if the school board offered more than Fargo, and we clearly demonstrated that that you would settle this contract.
And I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're concerned about the cost of living not increasing. What cost of living of increase is going to affect every teacher in this district next year? That was just put into effect.
I'm confused by the question.
All of our taxes are going to go up because of the bond referendum, and that's going to be an average of another $600 a year for every teacher. Add that to the $2,160, we've already gone backwards. That's almost $3,000 next year.
Well, first, that depends on what the value of your
And
house
that's-
is. It's not
If you own
exactly,
property.
if you own property.
But that's
In the
going to,
district.
that's
In
going
the
to,
district, in the school district, yeah.
I mean, we've argued about taxes going up, and I can tell you this, my taxes doubled last year. And I never changed my property when taxable valuations went up. Now they're gonna go up again, approximately $600. Because I supported the junior high along with the rest of the teachers here, because it's something this community needs. However, why should our employees go backwards now in pay? Because we're supporting something that's good for the community and good for the kids, but our taxes are gonna go up, our cost of living is gonna increase. Taxes are a cost of living, correct? We have to pay them. So it's something else that needs to be added into that equation.
Well, I think when you figured that, weren't you figuring property taxes as a whole when you figured the money?
I haven't done any analysis on how that impacts the cost of living,
Yeah.
or gasoline, or hamburger, that's why I'm curious to see the cost. I was not aware that there is a cost of living index for cities in North Dakota. If there is, that's great data to have.
Yeah.
If you use the national thing that is politically charged, in my opinion, but that number was 1.99. And that's why we had to increase our Harlow's contract, because that's the one we used the CPIU there. I'm not aware of, I don't think taxes are computed in cost of living in any urban areas that I know of. In terms of how that, well, I don't want this to be a tax discussion, but next year the board has amended their certificate of levy. The impact in the first year will be 14.95 mils. And so depending on what the value of your property was, Brian, will impact that. Of that 14.95, the board cut 5.38 prior to doing that. So the net is, around that 8. And I don't know what the city and the county and the park district are going to levy, but my guess would be that the levy will go down even with Dickinson Public Schools bond election in there. Now, that won't mean that you'll pay less taxes. It will if the value of your home or your section of land or your commercial building stayed exactly the same. I mean, that's just pure economics. If the mills go down and your property stays the same, your taxes will go down. And I don't expect when I get my pink slip in December that our house on 13th Street will change much. But we told the patrons what it could go to, and the second year we'll have to levy more because we'll be in a full year of repaying the bonds. So.
Well, all good information. So if I could recap just a minute, is what I'm hearing is that Mr. Fay and Mr. Reap are going to get together and make sure that we are on the same
We will attempt to, but I mean, it's very difficult with volleyball and.
same page.
Let me know if there's questions about any of those, Jim. Shoot me an email and we'll sit down. But we're not saying we have to, right?
No.
He's busy and so am I. But if you have questions
It
about
would
how
have
I
to be. It would have to be in after supper time, and I don't think that either one of us want to take family time away. And
I hope not.
Anything else? I hear none. I would make a motion. Hear a motion?
Next meeting.
Schedule the I'm sorry. Item number 6. The next meeting will be next Wednesday, November
5th?
Yeah.
Is it the 5th?
Yeah.
November 5th at 7
7
p.m. here in the boardroom. Mr. Wall, do you want to sign a chair or?
I'll be chairing.
Okay, Mr. Wall will chair.
do we want to look at possible someplace else that might accommodate a number of spectators, or is there out in
Change
the
the venue.
hallway right now?
Yeah.
And
I think to accommodate the public that's appearing to see what's going on, we should consider somewhere else that accommodates.
If they have the ability to have,
Use the lunchroom at Hagen.
Okay,
Yeah.
Would that be? That should be big enough.
that should be big enough.
We'll
We
have to
can
check
set
the
a table
schedule
up
for
at
the
the
morning.
Yep.
Both of our things.
yeah,
We'll have to check the availability, so,
Okay.
I
yeah.
don't know if they have conferences.
Do the breakfast
No, because
in
that's
the
quarter
morning?
change, that's the first week of the new,
Yeah,
Oh,
Tom,
this
is
is
there
evening.
next
Okay.
week, do that?
Yeah, the
Of
breakfast
course, I
in the
know
morning.
that, we just said
Yeah,
that.
they do.
So evening
great.
may be okay?
Yeah.
They've had theirs? Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that may be okay, we'll.
Ours are in the middle, ours are in the middle of the 9 weeks.
Yeah. We have no objections to that.
Okay,
If-
thank
We'll
you.
check with
If-
Ms.
Well, we'll have to check, obviously.
Check with Dr.
We're not
Luton.
gonna talk.
Well, right.
We're not gonna schedule it for Dr. Luton, we'll ask Dr. Luton.
We'll ask her
Right.
first.
So, I have no objections to that at all. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.